This is the generation of them that seek his face. This is the generation of them that seek his face.
We want to welcome each and every one of you this day to Olive Tree Congregation, Olive Tree Fellowship, and we are Olive Tree, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the reason I want to make sure we see that and we understand that is that there are several olive trees throughout the United States. We incorporated under Olive Tree Fellowship, and there's two Olive Tree Fellowships, and there's Olive Tree congregations, and again, some are Messianic and some are Baptist. In fact, there's an Olive Tree Baptist, and so there are different olive trees, and a person called us from California saying we did not receive our tax exempt for this year, and they sent it to us, and it turned out that they sent it to us, but they actually sent it to another olive tree in I don't know where the other olive tree that they sent it to was, but so if those of you that are sending in your tithings and or offerings through our PayPal, just want to make sure that when you look at the internet that it is Olive Tree Albuquerque, Olive Tree Fellowship Albuquerque, again, so that all of us Olive Tree named groups will be at peace with each other. So today we are studying Parashot Ekev. And in Hebrew, it is actually the first ayin there, the first symbol, that's an ayin. In Hebrew, that is a silent letter. And so this is an and that's a kof, and that's a vet, ekev. And actually, it's not a B. It's a B sound if it's at the beginning, but it's a V, so it's not Ekev, it's Ekev, and that's a V sound. And Ekev, or Ekev, as it is pronounced, found in other places, other English, means as a result. And we're going to look at that meaning a little bit deeper. But in today's parashah, there are 11 talking points. There's every parashah has some teaching points or talking points, an outline. Every parashah is in outline form. At least what I've done, I've gotten the whole Torah, and I put it again in every parashah. I made it into an outline, and that outline is the different aspects that we need to study. Every one of these could become a sermon. In fact, what some rabbis or pastors do is they only get one of these points, and they actually make a sermon on that one point. They do a topical sermon on different things. And what I like to do is, instead of just focusing on one, what I like to do all the time is just do a survey so that you could kind of get the gist of the parashah, but that you could go back home during the week and study it and see what it teaches you. You study it before and you study it after. On like tomorrow, and tomorrow I'll start working on next week. But tomorrow I'll also start reviewing what I studied for this parasha. So you go 1 week before, and then you go 1 week after, and they overlap. And if you overlap them, then you'll start getting a lot of the context of what the parashot are all about. In fact, sometimes some parashot are singular parashot that everything is in there, but some of them are like double, they overlap. Some of them have 4 parashot is in one, what I would call one section of understanding, which is here in Deuteronomy. There are 4 sections of understanding, and all the parashot divide that into little subsections. So let's go ahead and start looking at this. Deuteronomy 7:12. Vachaya. The chaya, and it shall be. Chaya is the to be verb. By the way, chaya is the to be verb from which Yahweh, Yod He Vav He, comes. The noun Yahweh comes from the verb chaya. Chaya, asher chaya. And Ekev. Now, Ekev means as a result, because, or as a consequence, as we would probably use the word if you listen. Now, if you look at this word right here, tish me'un, you see the word shin mem f, and then over here we have an ayin. That's the word shema. The word shema is here. If you listen at this point, to be now, if you listen to the mishpatim, if you listen, and to listen in Hebrew means to obey also. When you tell a child, listen up, many times you're saying, obey. Listen up and be attentive. And so Ekev means as a result, or because you listen, because you obey. Now, Ekev is about commandments. It's about commandments, the head and the heel commandments, the best commandments, the least commandments, the most important commandments, the least important commandments. And we're going to look towards the end, how does this apply to us as believers in Messiah? Now, Matthew 5:17, I believe, is one of the most important scriptures that we need to have memorized. And this is Yeshua speaking. Do not imagine that I came to abolish the Torah and the prophets. Of course, in most English Bibles, I came to abolish the law. The word law is there. Or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to complete them. In truth, I tell you, till heaven and earth disappear, not one yod, not one tittle is to disappear from Torah until all its purpose is achieved. Now, one of the things that we see here is here's a yod. The yod is the smallest little letter in the aleph bet. And a tittle, you see this symbol here, that's a hey. Notice that it kind of rounds off and it has this like a little leg. This is one. But notice this one. This one almost looks like the hey. This is a tav. But notice that it has a little feet here and it has a little, some little hair sticking out over here in the front like a Vip's big boy. And in one of the different fonts, you could actually see it more. But what makes this different from a hey is this little tittles. That's a little tittle. That's a little tittle. And everyone has, especially in written down, and for some reason the computer didn't pick up the other one, like this one. You see the way these ones are right here? There's like that little Vips Big Boy little up there. Those of you that remember Vips Big Boy. And that right there is a little tittle. If we took this little tittle away right there, this becomes a chaf. And so letters are different just because of the tittle. That little yod right there makes a difference. And so Yeshua said, in truth I tell you, till heaven and earth disappear, not one yod, not one tittle is to disappear from Torah, until all its purpose is achieved. What this is telling me right now is that the purpose of Torah has not been achieved yet. The purpose of Torah has not been achieved yet. That is still in the future. In fact, it is in the 1,000-year kingdom. Now, what Yeshua taught us to pray is, our Father who is in heaven, and he taught us to pray, give us this day our daily bread. Actually, from the beginning, our Father who is in heaven, holy is your name. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And he taught us to pray, thy kingdom come. Yeshua said, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. When the end comes, it'll be the kingdom time. The purpose of Torah will be achieved in the millennial kingdom after the 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel, the last 7 years, after the after the resurrection and the rapture, and the kingdom comes, and we will live and reign with Messiah for 1,000 years. That's when it will be achieved, because there, when Yeshua comes back, he's going to come back as prophet, as priest, and as king. And when he comes back, the Torah will now be the law of the land. Not only the land of Israel, but it'll be the rule of the world. There's going to be one constitution in the world in the millennium, and that's Torah. And the millennium is the kingdom that everybody is searching for. The Shangri-La, the utopia, the one world government that everybody wants to achieve by their own hands, by manipulation, by manly authority, is going to be achieved by Yeshua in 1,000 years, and the Torah is going to be achieved. The Torah is going to be fulfilled. The temple is going to be rebuilt. The sacrificial system is going to start up. Everything, in fact, the world is going to be ruled with a rod of iron. Everything that we see here today is going to be achieved, fulfilled in the kingdom. But it hasn't been achieved yet. It's being achieved. Certain aspects are achieved, are fulfilled. But even Yeshua, when he lifted up the cup, and he says, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until it is achieved, until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, because the Torah isn't achieved yet, because it isn't completely fulfilled yet. Everything is still not disappeared. Not one yod, not one tittle from Torah is to be abolished. Therefore, anyone who, what? Infringes even one of the least of these commandments. There are head commandments, and there are Ekev, there are heel commandments, small commandments, little commandments, that even the least, if it is infringed, but watch what it says, and teaches others to do the same. Anyone who infringes one of the least of these commandments, one of these mishpatim in Hebrew, and teaches others to do the same, will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. But the person who keeps them, in fact, you heard the word Shema, keeps them and teaches them, will be considered great in the kingdom of heaven. By the way, notice what it's not saying here. It's not saying anyone who infringes even one of the least of these commandments and teaches others will lose his salvation. We're not talking about, this is not a salvation issue, as we're going to see. Will be considered least in the kingdom of heaven. See, in the kingdom of heaven, in the millennial kingdom, there are those that will be considered great, and there's those that are going to be considered least. The ones that will be considered great are the ones who kept the commandments and taught the commandments and taught the laws of Torah. They taught and kept the laws of Torah. And of course, the ones that will be considered least are the ones who infringed them, who did not keep them. But notice that they do not lose their salvation. They are in the kingdom, but they will be considered, least in the kingdom. We could see great and least in the kingdom in the parables of Yeshua. Yeshua talks about those servants of the kingdom that did these positive things and they got blessed, and these servants of the kingdom who did not do their best, did not, in the case of the talents, did not use the talents well, they will be considered least in the kingdom of Elohim. They will not be cast out, but they will be those that will be weeping and gnashing of teeth in the kingdom. And so it's important for us to look at this before we go into much more of our studies in the Parashot, because from last week, this week, next week, we will have all kinds of commandments, mishpatim, hukim, idot, that we've talked about many times. And what we need to make sure we do is that we, as Messianic, see, we're Mosaic. To be Mosaic means you follow Torah and the prophets. To be Messianic now means that you follow it according to Yeshua's standards. And of course, later on we will see that to be apostolic means to follow Torah and Messiah according to the apostles and what they wrote. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be considered least in the kingdom. I want to be considered great in the kingdom. Now, before we begin, we must also say this is not a salvation issue. We're not talking about salvation. Salvation is by grace through faith, not by works. This last Wednesday, we finished up our 6-week study. We did a 6-week study on law versus grace, then we found out that there's no such thing as law versus grace. The Torah and grace have always worked together. Now, there is a legalism versus grace, and there is a works versus faith, and we declared that we are saved not by works but by faith, and legalism has no place in the body of Messiah. And so it's important that this scripture, Matthew 5:17, gracias, hermano. And I do want to apologize for my coughing. Every so often I get this, and be praying for my lungs and what they found in my lungs. So be praying for that, and that Adonai does a healing. I'm trying to get compensation from the veterans for my exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam, but I'd rather have a healing. I'd rather have a healing than any money that they could give. So pray for a healing, and that Adonai would bring that healing. Now, let's look at here, and let's go into the scriptures. Listen, or if you listen, because you listen to these mishpatim. So the first thing we need to see here in our second sermon that Moses gives is that if you listen, if you observe, so the word to listen in Hebrew, shema, also means obey, to observe. And I like the way my translation says it. It says, listen to the ordinances, to the mishpatim, be true to them and observe them, and in return, there's that if or because, and in return, your Father, your Yahweh, your Elohim, will be true to the covenant and the kindness he promised to your fathers. So Adonai promised to our fathers, beginning with Abraham, Isaac, and of course Yaakov. He promised them. He made covenants with them. And he promised them a land, a seed, and a blessing. Again, the land, seed, and the blessing is for this life, to get us into the everlasting life, but that is for the here and now. And he says, Shema, listen to the mishpatim. If you listen to the mishpatim, if you observe the mishpatim, if you obey the mishpatim, then Adonai is going to promise. He's going to give you descendants. He's going to give you produce. Your animals will reproduce abundantly. And he will bring healing. In fact, I like the way it says it there. Go to verse, the end of 15, where he says that Yahweh will keep sickness far from you. He will not afflict you with the evil plagues of Egypt, which you have known, but will save them for those who hate you. The diseases of Egypt are for our enemies, not for us. But if we are to keep, see, here's where I really feel that regardless of where we're at right now, we are still far. I still see that even Israel, even in any aspect of Israel, we are still far from keeping everything as He has called us. We need to devote ourselves more to keeping of the mishpatim, the hukim, the idot, and all the judgments and that Adonai wants to bless us and keep us from. At the end of Deuteronomy, we're going to see there's blessings and cursings. Again, has nothing to do with, these are not salvation issues. These are issues for this life. Of course, in eternity, we're not going to be sick. So health is not for eternity. That's where we're going to have perfect health. Health is for here. I want health today. I want health from all the afflictions that afflict us. We are a world of affliction. Again, even the believers, we are afflicted. And I want Adonai to heal me, to heal us from all these afflictions. And what does He say? If you observe. Father, teach us to observe even the least, even the yods and tittles. And Adonai will keep us from any attacks that the enemy will try to devour us. They're going to try to attack, to devour is the word that is used here. And Adonai wants to keep us from attacks of the enemy. And I'm looking at this also politically in Israel. Of course, this specifically is for Israel. But as Israel has gone into diaspora, into exile, and we're all over the world, but Adonai wants to bring us back home, which He's doing. But I believe that Adonai wants us to start changing our mind and start getting our attitude, not so much from the idea, well, as you've heard many times, God understands. Oh, I'm trying, but I can't be perfect. I can't be holier than thou and all that type of stuff. And so one of the things is we allow ourselves to live at the bottom. We allow ourselves not to live where He wants us to live. And we are bottom livers right now, where we should be living at a place that is higher. And I believe this is why we really need to look at this area of the Mishpatim and Hukim. Let's go on to the power of Yahweh. Watch what it says in verse 17. You must say in your heart, these nations, you may say in your heart, these nations outnumber me. How shall I be able to dispose them? Again, here we have the idea of fear, doubt, unbelief, the idea that something is stronger than me, the idea that something is more powerful than me. We have to know that if we keep the Mishpatim, if we keep the Hukim, if we keep the laws of Torah, then it is Adonai. Watch this. Do not be afraid of them. Remember, by the way, in last week's parasha, this week's and next week, one thing, find all the remembers, and it says, remember. 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 What does it mean to remember? To remember means that sometimes we forget. We forget all kinds of stuff. Especially as we get older, we're forgetting more stuff. But one thing we must never forget, one thing we must always remember, is what Adonai has done and who He is. Do not be afraid of them. Remember how Yahweh, your Elohim, dealt with Pharaoh and all Egypt and the great ordeals. Your own eyes have seen the signs, the wonders. the mighty hand and outstretched arm with which Yahweh your Elohim has brought you out. One of the most important reasons for studying Torah, studying all the scriptures, is it reminds us of what Adonai has done. What he's done in the history of our people, what he's done in the history of the nations, what he's even done in my history. Think of what Adonai has done in your own history. Where did you all come from? Where did we come from? How many of you could actually say, I probably would not be here if it wasn't for Adonai? Don't raise your hands. I want to protect the guilty here. What is my history? I would not be. Adonai has saved me. In my military career, Adonai saved me 3 times. 3 times I could see that he saved me. He saved me many times. Situations, car wrecks, heart attack in the middle of a desert. Adonai has saved us. He saved me. I could actually say, this is my history. I need to remember. In fact, giving testimonies is so important. And sometimes we forget even the testimonies that he's done in our lives. We must remember what Adonai did with our people in freeing us from Egypt. Is one of the greatest stories that we need to pass on. In fact, the whole reason for Passover, the whole reason for the Passover, what we call the Seder, the Haggadah, the whole reason for Passover is to remember. Passover is a memorial. It is a zakaron. The word zakaron means a memorial, a remembrance. In fact, that's the word here, zakaron. It's a remembrance, and you remember it to tell it to your children so that they tell it to their children and they tell it to their children. As we do Passover every year at our house, and we do it with an oral Haggadah, not a written Haggadah, with an oral Haggadah, and we tell the stories and we talk about what happened. Every year is a little different because sometimes you remember this more and you remember that more, but the children are listening, and then later on they will be able to tell it to their children and their children. And it's a time to remember what Adonai has done. And with outstretched arm, with a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, with power, the power of Yahweh was there. And he has set us free. He has given us so much of what we did not have that we have now. I am blessed now. What I have now is by the power of Yahweh. Let's go to 8:1. Verse 1. All the mitzvot, all the commandments I enjoin on you today, you must keep and observe, so that you may live long and increase in numbers and enter into the land that Yahweh has promised on oath to your fathers to make it your own. Remember. Now, again, notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, all the commandments I enjoin on you today, you must keep and observe so that you may be saved. Again, at no time is keeping the commandments a salvation issue. It is an issue for today. It is an issue for our lives. It is an issue for our blessing or our cursing. And we have to make sure that we do that. Again, the word zakaron is there. Remember, verse 2. Remember how Yahweh your Elohim led you for 40 years in the wilderness. For 40 years in the wilderness. What was the purpose of that 40-year unknown time? Remember? We don't know what happened in the 40 years. We're told what happened when they started the 40-year, and we are told what happens when they ended the 40-year sojourn. The scriptures never tell us what they did in those 40 years. We know they just wandered about Kadesh Barnea, went in circles around Kadesh, but we don't know what happened. There's no stories. It's almost like Adonai for 40 years has kept us in the dark about what happened. We know all the problems they had going into and why they got into 40 years of wilderness. And we know all the problems that they occurred afterwards. But we don't know what happened. What was the purpose of that? And the purpose is that man does not live by bread alone, but by the very utterance of Elohim's mouth does man live. And we find that here. That's in verse 3. That you may know, that you may understand. He even made us hungry. He made us thirsty so we could depend on him. One of the most important aspects of a believer's life, and to become a believer, in fact, to become a believer is very hard. Becoming a believer is very hard. And the reason it's very hard is that we have to be humble. Being humble is hard. Prideful. Oh, I did this and I did that, and it was by my muscle power, by my mental power. You know, we're always trying to, by us, we always want to manipulate. In fact, the word manipulate, manos, to do things by our own hand. We want to be saved by ourselves. In fact, works is a manipulation of salvation. Works is a manipulation of salvation. It's a prideful manipulation of salvation. But to be saved, we have to say, I can't do anything. I have to depend on someone to save me. I cannot save myself. Adonai humbled us for 40 years. And he taught us, he made us hungry, he made us thirsty. That we don't live by bread alone. We don't live by what we make. But what we live by is by the words, the utterance. In fact, Genesis to Revelation is the utterance. It's the only utterance of Adonai. That's why I keep saying this is the only book that you could trust. Everything outside of this book is just our own opinions. That's why it's incumbent upon everyone to look at what this book says. Not what we say. What we say is just encouragement. It's trying to lead you into this. A responsibility of a shepherd is to lead you to water, just to lead you to water. But we are not the water. He is the water. And we lead you to the water, but you have to drink. And there's a lot of people that we lead to water and they just take a couple of licks. I'm thirsty. And they're always thirsty. They're always hungry because you bring them to the water. You bring them to the straw, the alfalfa. You bring them to the food stuff and they don't like it or they don't want it. And they want to go get their own stuff, which leads us to destruction so many times. But we do not live by ourselves alone. What we make, we live by the very word of Elohim. And it is here that we learn discipleship. Verse 5. Learn from this that Yahweh your Elohim is training you as a man trains his child, and keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, and so follow his ways and revere him. From this, from those 40 years, from what we went through for 40 years, we learn discipleship. He is training us. Yeshua trained 12 men. One of them got kicked out of boot camp right before graduation. 11 men were trained. 11 men were discipled. 11 men. And he sent these 11 men, commissioned, ordained, appointed these 11 men to go into the whole world and now disciple others who would disciple others who would disciple others till today. Discipleship is part of our training. Discipleship, in fact, the Great Commission is not about evangelism. The Great Commission is about discipleship. Make disciples. He didn't say, Yeshua didn't tell him, go evangelize all nations. No, he says, go make disciples. Yes, before discipleship, there's evangelism, but the apostolic decree, what is called the Great Commission, the apostolic decree, the decree to the apostles, was go make disciples. Be disciple makers, be trainers, be teachers. Disciple them. And of course, the word disciple is what? Discipline. When we are disciplined, and we're not talking about spanking discipline. In fact, one of the most important aspects of discipleship, discipline, is found in the military. The military is a great discipleship program where you're totally discipled. And your language is changed the first day. Everything is changed the first day. From the first day, you become, in a sense, another person. From what you grew up, you learn different things, some positive, some negative. But they disciple you. It is the responsibility of every pastor congregation within the body of Messiah to disciple, not just to evangelize. There's a lot of churches that are great evangelistic churches, and they have all kinds of people coming in, but all the people have never been discipled. And discipleship takes training. Discipleship takes discipline. Discipleship takes this idea that I have to allow someone to tell me what I might not like sometimes, or what I might not like to do sometimes. Many times we didn't like, and I'm sure that you didn't like all those marches that you had to go through. Some of those were heavy. Some of you in the all these, probably we could rule out the Air Force guys. Our Air Force colonel isn't here today. But it's discipline. It's hard. We don't want to go through that. But we have to. In 8:7, we learn that the promised land has many temptations. And there we see, but Yahweh, your Elohim, is bringing you into a prosperous land, a land of streams and springs of water that well up from the deep in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, of figs, pomegranates, a land of olives, of oil, of honey, a land where you will eat bread without stint, where you will want nothing, a land where the stones are of iron, where the hills may be quarried for copper. You will eat and have all you want, and you will bless Yahweh your Elohim in that rich land that he has given you. You will, Berit Hamazon, you will bless Adonai. And these are the land of prosper, a land of greatness. Can you imagine? If you obey Adonai, you will have it made. You will have it made. But again, remember. And what do we need to remember? Take care, 11, that you do not forget Yahweh your Elohim, neglecting his mitzvot, his commandments, his mishpatim, his hukim, which I lay on you today. And when you have eaten all you want, when you have built fine houses to live in, when you have seen your flocks increase, your silver, gold abound, and all your possessions grow great, do not become proud of heart. Do not get puffed up. Do not look. Do not forget that it is Yahweh, your Elohim. It is Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Actually, the house of slavery is the furnace. They call it the furnace. We were in the furnace. Our ancestors were in the furnace. But remember, do not forget, remember, it is Yahweh who gave us manna. Actually, in Hebrew, it is man. Man. The word manna is the word man now, like food now, food now. Man, he gave us man. And beware, verse 17, saying in your heart, my own strength and might of my own hand won this power for me. Remember, it is Yahweh, your Elohim. It was he who gave you this strength. There's this pride, humility that every day of our lives, throughout our life, we always have to deal with. So many times we get so proud of heart and we think it was me. It's because I went to school, or it's because I did this, or I found this out, or me-itis. When we have to always know that it is Adonai who gives us, and in return for him giving us these things, we obey him, and he in return for us doing these things will give us in return, and we in return, and he in return. We work together. He calls us to obey, and I will bless. And when he blesses us, we bless him. We thank him for the bread that I didn't make. It didn't come from me. Everything comes from him. Verse 19, be sure that if you forget Yahweh your Elohim, if you follow other gods, other Elim, if you serve them and bow down before him, I warn you today, you will most certainly perish. Like the nations that Yahweh is to destroy before you, so you yourselves shall perish for not having listened to the voice of Yahweh, your Elohim. Idols. Look at the idols we came from in Egypt. We came from a land of idols, but we're also going to a land of idols. In fact, we came from the abominations of Egypt, but the abominations of Canaan are even worse than the abominations of Egypt. Because in the abominations of Canaan, the gods of Canaan don't just demand a worship or a offering of fruits or other staples to their gods. The gods of Canaan want your children, and they will sacrifice your children. Chapter 9, verse 1. Listen, Israel. Shema Israel. Chayom Chadzeh. Listen today, Israel. You are about to cross the Jordan and go and dispose nations greater. Nations greater. And stronger than yourself, to capture cities fortified to the sky, a people great and tall, the Anakim, as you know. Who could stand up to the sons of Anak, they would say. Be therefore sure today that Yahweh your Elohim will go in front of you, a devouring fire that will destroy them, and he himself will substitute you for them. Do not say in your heart, verse 4, when Yahweh your Elohim has driven them before you, it is for my own goodness that Yahweh has brought me in possession of this land. No, it is for their wickedness that Yahweh disposes these nations before you. It's not because of our goodness, it is because of their wickedness. This land is ours, not because of us, but because their wickedness, their pride, their self-righteousness. And we cannot have that pride and self-righteousness. They were disposed because of their pride, their self-righteousness, because of their wickedness. But if we do what they do, we will be disposed. And I'm going to say something here that I know might get some of my friends who might be listening upset, but I do not believe that Israel is yet in the land. That Israel is yet in the land. In fact, yes, there is a state of Israel that the United Nations, the League of Nations, the United Nations have set up. Yes, some of our people are there, both following the covenant of Adonai and those that have rejected the covenant of Adonai. And yes, there's many people in the land of Israel. But this is a thing that is only beginning to take place today, and the final coming into the land will definitely be in the millennium. Between now and the millennium, in the 70th week of Daniel, the last 70 years, and even in that, Israel is going, Adonai is going to raise up all 12 tribes. The 12 tribes are going to be raised up. And there's going to be 12,000, 144,000 from each tribe that are going to be great witnesses of the bringing in of Israel. But Hasatan's going to attack, and Yeshua is going to come in and destroy the Babylon that is even forming now around the world, which Israel is still part of today. And Yeshua is going to come back and set up the true Israel, the real Israel of Elohim, made up of the 12 tribes and Gentile nations that have followed Messiah, and all of them have to have followed Messiah. Again, a lot of people would disagree with that. Remember, verse 7, do not forget how you provoked Yahweh your Elohim in the wilderness. And again, he goes again with another history lesson. He tells them about everything that occurred and all the different things that they need to remember about the first set, the second set of stone tablets that